I want to begin by thanking our witnesses. The Honorable Deanna Criswell, the Administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Ms. Kristen Bernard, the Deputy Inspector General for Audits for Office of the Inspector General at the Department of Homeland Security. It's a long. And Mr. Chris Curry, the Director of Homeland Security and Justice for the United States Government Accountability Office, for being here today. I'm glad that's on your card. You probably don't want to say that every time you meet somebody. Today's hearing will focus on examining the propriety of the expanding use of FEMA resources and how it's impacting FEMA's ability to carry out its core mission. Fundamentally, FEMA's core mission is to help people before, during, and after disasters. More specifically, states lead the responses to disaster, and FEMA comes in at the request of the state if the state's resources are overwhelmed, or at least that's how it was supposed to work. Increasingly, however, it seems that states are asking for help in more and more incidents that states themselves should be prepared to handle, like snowstorms in the Northeast. So we have an increasing reliance on the federal government, and then we add that FEMA is also being tasked to manage non-traditional disasters like pandemics and help with issues completely unrelated to its mission, or so-called non-Stafford Act disasters. Between 2014 and 2020, FEMA was deployed 7 times to address non-Stafford Act disasters. In just the last 3 years, that has jumped to 16 non-Stafford Act disasters. These include the crisis at our nation's southwest border, Operation Allies Welcome, Operation Vaccinate Our Workforce, and the list goes on. There is such an increasing demand on the agency that FEMA created a new National Incident Management Assistance Team to respond to disasters that fall outside FEMA's typical mission set. In addition to being called on to address these non-Stafford Act disasters from 2020 to 2023, FEMA also led the federal government's response to COVID-19. To date, as it relates to COVID-19, FEMA has obligated $75 billion in public assistance, $44.3 billion for individual assistance, $36.5 billion for lost wage assistance, and $3.1 billion for the COVID-19 funeral assistance program. Not surprisingly, with all this money flowing out, the DHSIG found billions in fraud and improper payments, sadly. In the Lost Wages Assistance Program alone, the DHSOIG estimated more than $3.7 billion, that's B with a billion, in improper payments. It got to a point that the OIG set up a COVID fraud unit, and stealing FEMA funding became a crime of convenience for criminal organizations, including related crimes like identity theft. What's more, FEMA has continued to defend the administration of the Lost Wages Assistance Program, going as far as to say that sufficient internal controls were implemented. The fact that FEMA has failed to implement more controls raises serious concerns about FEMA's recently announced interim rule, which would make significant changes to FEMA's individual assistance program. Some of the most shocking changes, including giving households $750 cash payments, paying individuals upfront for housing options of their choice, and providing upfront payments to individuals who are choosing to stay with family and friends, and I think we'll get into this, under a self-certification circumstance. Many of these changes ignore some of the Inspector General's key recommendations to reduce fraud. The question really is, where is the accountability in all of this? Why aren't states doing what they need to do to budget for these costs? Where is the expectation that states, local governments, and individuals carry insurance? How are these added responsibilities on FEMA impacting its core mission, especially since we know from the GAO that FEMA has a workforce shortage that seems, from my count, to be pretty prolific? FEMA can't be all things to all people. We have to get a handle on the proper role of FEMA and ensure FEMA's internal controls reduce fraud and misuse of taxpayer funds. I'd look forward to hearing from our witnesses on these issues.